All right, it looks like that participant numbers have sort of stopped going up dramatically. So maybe I'll take a couple of minutes to introduce our session today. Hello, everyone. My name is Sonya Betz, and I would really like to welcome you all to this 90-minute community organized workshop for Canadian journals that are published or hosted through academic libraries, all about SSHRC's Aid to Scholarly Journals grant program. I am the head of library publishing and digital production services at the University of Alberta, where we partner with more than 60 different open access journals through our open journal publishing program. I'm also a settler living and working in the Miskwachi-Waskahikan, or Edmonton, which is situated on Treaty 6 territory and also within the Métis Homelands and Métis Nation of Alberta Region 4. I'd like to take a minute to encourage everyone attending this workshop today to just introduce yourself using the chat function. I think we've got a lot of participants. I see 62 on the list so far. And you're coming to us from all across the country. So since we can't see each other, it'd be really nice for you to say hello, pop into the chat, let us know if you're a journal editor or a member of an editorial team, or if you work with a library, and then maybe where in the country you're joining us from. Okay, before we get started, I just want to thank Julie Morin and Lise Bryn at CARL, the Canadian Association of Research Libraries, for providing us with support for this virtual meeting today. They managed all of the registration, provided us with this virtual Zoom webinar and technical support, and really helped a lot with planning and organizing this event. Also, a big thank you to my co-conspirator, Mariya Maistrovskaya from University of Toronto. I do think this was all her idea. Of course, my biggest thanks today go to our presenters. We're joined by two representatives from SSHRC who have very graciously agreed to provide a workshop about the Aid to Scholarly Journals grant program and answer questions from members of our community. So Dina Guth is Acting Manager, Research Grants Portfolio, and Emma Yoxon is Program Officer, Research Grants Portfolio. Dina and Emma are going to spend about 45 minutes speaking about the grant, and there'll be lots of time for you to ask questions and seek clarification. I'm going to ask you to enter your questions into the Q&A box, so you'll see that at the bottom of your screen. It's a little bit easier for everyone to see those questions as they come up if you put them there instead of in the chat. And finally, note that we're recording this event, and it's going to be posted to the CARL YouTube channel for others to view. Okay, I think I'm going to hand things over now. Dina and Emma, are you ready to go? Great. Okay, I'll mute myself and take it away.
Okay, hello. I hope everybody hears me. Yes, it's good. Okay.
Yes, great.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, welcome everybody. I'm very happy to be here and to be presenting about the Aid to Scholarly Journals competition for the 2021 year. I'll just get started, and here's an overview of the presentation and some of the main points that we're going to be going through today. I'll start with some basic points about the funding opportunity and some details about the funding that it provides before getting into the eligibility criteria. So going through eligibility criteria for the applicant, the administering institution, the journal, some open access eligibility criteria, and eligibility criteria for the editorial board of eligible journals. And then we'll get into some more of the nitty-gritty in the application form, some modifications that were made to this competition in light of the pandemic situation, and the impacts of the pandemic on journals, and then look at the evaluation and adjudication criteria used by our committees when evaluating applications, and then some points about the results and dates. So that's kind of just an outline of what we'll be going through today. We will be taking questions at the end, as Sonya pointed out, but please feel free to stick them into the Q&A as we go along, and we'll be happy to answer any questions after the presentation. Okay, so just to briefly go over the funding opportunity. The base grant is a 3-year. It's a 3-year grant in its duration of up to $30,000 per year. That's the base grant, and the funding opportunity also offers a $5,000 supplement per year. The deadline for submissions of applications for this funding round is September 10th, 2021 at 8 p.m. Eastern. And the results of the funding will be announced in March of next year. So, 6 months for the review, the committee review of applications and determinations of merit and funding. And I should say, as we go through that, for those of you who may have been familiar with the Aid to Scholarly Journals from the past competition, the 2018 competition, there really has not been any major changes to the program, except for, of course, the changes that were made because of the COVID situation. So in terms of a kind of general brief description of the funding opportunity, Aid to Scholarly Journals grants are expected to respond to the objectives of the Insight program at SSHRC. And they support Canadian scholarly dissemination by offering a contribution to enable journals to explore innovative practices and to defray the costs associated with publishing scholarly articles, digital publishing, and journal distribution on Canadian not-for-profit platforms. The goals of the funding opportunity are really fourfold. So first, to increase dissemination, discoverability, and readership of original research results in the social sciences and humanities through Canadian scholarly journals, to leverage significant federal investments in digital scholarly publishing infrastructure, to assist journals as they seek to take advantage of developments in digital technologies and innovative practices, and finally, to encourage the transition to open access models of publishing. Okay, so turning now to the eligibility requirements for applications. Journals to this funding opportunity must be primarily focused on social sciences and humanities disciplines. So that means that if the mandate or the content of a journal is primarily focused outside of disciplines within SSHRC's mandates, outside of social sciences and humanities, then the journal would be ineligible. Journals are also ineligible for funding if the content of the journal is primarily health related and focused on clinical research and education, psychomotor research and kinesiology, counseling and therapy, and epidemiology. We do get quite a few questions about the eligibility of content for journals. I would encourage anybody who has any kind of specific questions about a specific journal to send us an email through our inbox. And that's the best way of getting a program officer to review the journal and to see whether it would be eligible for funding. The program does accept multidisciplinary journals, so journals with mixed content, some content that is within our mandate and some that is not. The content and mandate must be, of course, primarily within the disciplines in SSHRC's mandate. And in that case, those multidisciplinary journals will be funneled into a particular committee that adjudicates the multidisciplinary journals. And the funding level is also adjusted so that only articles the funding is streamed only to sort of the proportion of articles a journal's output that fall within SSHRC's mandate. Okay. In terms of eligibility requirements for applicants, the applicant for the program has to be the editor-in-chief of the journal, or in the case of an editorial collective, one of the editors. Applicants also have to be a faculty member of an eligible Canadian post-secondary institution, and they assume responsibility for the grant. And again, I would suggest, for any specific questions about, the specific situation of a specific journal, the best way of getting answers about eligibility would be, in fact, to send us a message through the inbox, and one of our POs in charge of program officers in charge of the Aid to Scholarly Journals will get back to you very, very shortly with some responses. Okay, in terms of administering institutions, Aid to Scholarly Journals grants can be administered by in one of two ways, either by an eligible post-secondary institution, eligible Canadian post-secondary institution, I should say, or an eligible not-for-profit organization. And eligible not-for-profit organizations can be either the journal itself or a scholarly association or press that administers or owns the journal. In the case of not-for-profit organizations, these have to hold or obtain institutional eligibility. And this not-for-profit institutional eligibility has to be renewed for each competition. So even if your journal has been administered by a not-for-profit organization that has had institutional eligibility in the past, you do need to contact SSHRC again at the institutional eligibility inbox, and you can see the address there at the bottom of your screen to renew eligibility. We do strongly suggest that journals and institutions not-for-profit institutions seeking to administer an Aid to Scholarly Journals grant contact us at this address as soon as possible, and at the latest 5 business days prior to the application deadline. The way that the application form works is that the applicant submits the form to the officer at the organization, and then the organization forwards the application to SSHRC. So in order for the applicant to be able to submit it to that organization, the organization needs to appear in our drop-down list. And for that to happen, we need to be notified that that organization is planning on administering the grant. So it's really highly important that this be done as early as possible, so that we can add the organization to the application drop-down menu, and the application can be submitted on time. Okay. In terms of eligibility requirements for the journal, journals must meet SSHRC's definition of a scholarly journal. That is that they have to submit articles to be published to a rigorous independent peer review process. And they may not be student-run, exclusively student-run journals. Journals also must have been founded at least 2 years prior to the application deadline. And there are publication minimums as well. So within that 2-year time frame, the journal must publish a minimum of 2 issues per year, with each issue having at least 3 peer-reviewed articles. Or if the journal publishes on a continuous cycle without an issue format, then it must publish at least 6 peer-reviewed articles per year over that 2-year period. And within the application form, journals will in fact be asked to provide data on the number of articles that have been published. I should also mention at this point that due to the effects of the pandemic on journals, we have relaxed those publication minimums for those journals that have been affected by the pandemic. So if a journal has been affected by the pandemic and has not, because of that, been able to meet these publication minimums, then we would still collect that data, but then the journal would have the opportunity to describe the impacts of COVID-19 on the production schedule in the journal description. Okay, to be eligible for Aid to Scholarly Journal funding, the journal must also publish primarily in English or in French. There are also eligibility requirements surrounding the business model for journals. So since the 2018 competition, Aid to Scholarly Journals has streamed funding towards open access journals and towards supporting open access in Canadian scholarly journal publishing. So journals seeking funding from the Aid to Scholarly Journals must offer either immediate open access upon publication or delayed open access with a 12-month maximum embargo period. These open access requirements apply only to scholarly articles and not all of the content that a journal might publish. So by article, we mean the original peer-reviewed content of a journal that publishes the results of research. Not, for example, that there are other examples, for example, literary journals, which may publish poetry and compositions that would not be subject to these open access requirements. And that's just one example. So in terms of eligibility requirements for editorial collectives, journals run by editorial collectives can name one person affiliated with a Canadian institution to assume responsibility for the grant. To be eligible, journals also have to have at least 1/3 of their editorial boards affiliated with an eligible Canadian institution, or the journal title has to be owned by a Canadian not-for-profit organization. And it's worth pointing out as well that the evaluation of the editorial direction criterion will put emphasis on the expertise of the editorial leadership team. So there will be a section in the application to detail the core editorial board, and that section will be highly important in this the merit review of the leadership of the journal. Okay, now I think I will be turning it over to Emma.
Yes, thank you, Dina. All right, so we're going to move away from eligibility requirements for a moment. We're going to talk a little bit more about the funding rate and then get into some of the application sections. So first of all, there are two funding rates that are provided as part of this funding opportunity that will determine the amount of funding that a journal is eligible for. So first, there's a higher rate granted to journals that do not charge any article processing charges, and that's what APC stands for in these slides. So it's $850 per article for an open access journal with article processing charges, and then $1,050 per article for open access journal or 12-month embargo without any article processing charges. Now, as Dina was mentioning at the top of the presentation, there is an up to $5,000 supplement on top of the $30,000 per year base grant for journals that are using a Canadian not-for-profit content and distribution platform. And that's defined as having a head office in Canada, a registered not-for-profit, and that offers integrated technical services that meet international standards related to data and metadata processing, workflow management and use of publishing tools, and also dissemination. And this platform must host more than 20 scholarly journals. Now, there is a more detailed description of this on our website if you want to get into a little bit more of the nitty-gritty eligibility requirements for this top-up. But I will let you know that we don't have, sorry, Dina, yeah, you can go to the next slide. So we don't have an exhaustive list of eligible platforms. Some examples are the University of Toronto Press, the University of Alberta Libraries, and Érudit is a francophone distribution platform. So it really is the applicant's responsibility to demonstrate that their platform meets the eligibility criteria in the journal format of the application if they wish to request this top up. And also the costs must be justified in the budget justification document. If you're not sure whether you meet the criteria, your best resource is probably your service provider to check if you meet those criteria. But do keep in mind that if you are not looking to get this $5,000 supplement, that use of a Canadian platform is not an eligibility criterion for the grant in general. Now, if your if your journal expects to transition to an eligible platform, a Canadian not-for-profit distribution platform, you may request the supplemental funding for the years following your transition. Note that the funds are meant to cover the direct costs of the platform, and it's not just a $5,000 flat rate. Also, if you are transitioning, the grant payment will be put on hold until you confirm that that transition to the Canadian not-for-profit platform has been made. Okay, so within the $30,000 base funding, there is also up to $5,000 that can be requested for innovative practices. This need will have to be justified in the application in the budget section. And you can indicate up to $5,000 for these practices. Now, some examples could be developing social media strategies to increase readership, producing high quality graphics, using extensive hyperlinking in your articles, and there's many other practices that could be employed. These are just a couple of examples. So if you're trying to figure out how much funding your journal qualifies for, there is, as we said before, a maximum $30,000 per year base grant if you're not using a Canadian not-for-profit distribution platform, and a maximum $35,000 if you are using a Canadian not-for-profit platform. Now, there are no maximum number of articles. However, the amount of funding available is based on those per article rates that I was speaking about before. So although you can state in your publication plan that the actual number of articles you intend to publish is greater than this amount, you can only request the base amount, the 30,000 or 35,000. So you will have to adjust the number of articles for which you're requesting SSHRC funding in order to ensure that the amount you're requesting fits within those maximums. Okay, this is an overview of the application form and all the different sections. There are quite a few sections, so I won't get into each one in great detail, but I will touch on a few points that we do tend to get a lot of questions about. So for instance, you do provide journal data, but also information on journal management. So it is possible that an individual applying is affiliated with one institution, but that the journal is managed under a separate institution or organization. And that's why we have those two separate sections. Second, we do occasionally get questions about the difference between the core editorial board and the publishing team. The core editorial board is the group that is responsible for making decisions on which articles are to be published, whereas the publishing team tends to be a larger group that isn't as directly involved in those decisions. Finally, I want to note that for our budget evaluation, committees do use the principle of minimum essential funding to guide their discussion of budgets. So this means that they are looking to provide the minimum amount necessary for the grant to be successful. So do take care in justifying your budget. Okay. One of the in one of our sections, you'll be asked to pick a business model for your journal, and there are 3 options available. So the first is an open access model without article processing charges, excuse me, and that's any journal that does not charge either authors or readers. The second option is an open access model with article processing charges, and that would be an author pay model. So that would refer to an author paying to publish their article in an open access format with no fees for readers. Finally, the last option is a subscription model with delayed open access or an embargo of up to 12 months. Okay, so the article data section is very important because it is used to determine the amount of funding to be requested. So do fill this out carefully. We're asked that you indicate information about the issues and articles that are published between June 1st, 2019 and May 31st, 2021. An article, as Dina was saying before, is the record of previously unpublished original research or scholarship. And it doesn't account for things like introductions or paper reviews, things like that. There is a more detailed description on our website, which I encourage you to read prior to your application. If the figures provided in this section are not representative of the typical output of the journal, we encourage applicants to explain this in the journal description module. And in particular, because in light of the pandemic, journals that are impacted by COVID-19, we highly encourage them to describe the impacts of the pandemic in this same section. So the journal description and outline of future direction section of the application. And as I was saying, SSHRC is aware of the impacts that COVID-19 has had on scholarly journals and on our community in general. And with this in mind, we are offering flexibility with respect to the minimum number of publications, readership data, and the journal impact measurements, as Dina was mentioning before. In addition to this, members of the Adjudication Committee will be given guidance to take the impacts of the pandemic into consideration during adjudication. Okay. So I'll speak briefly about the evaluation of applications and the adjudication process. This is a competitive merit review process, so it will follow the principles for SSHRC merit review, and the recommendations for funding given by the committee will be used to offer funding to successful applicants. There are no external assessors in this competition. And all committees are multidisciplinary in that they represent groups of disciplines. There is one committee, Committee 4, that will adjudicate multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary journals that don't have a specific disciplinary focus, and that's in addition to education, library sciences, and psychology. We expect the success rate to be similar to our previous competitions, which was about 75%. And then we can see here that there's a scoring chart, 1 being the lowest score that can be received and 6 being the highest score that can be received. Scores are given for each of the 3 adjudication criteria that I'll speak of in a moment, and these are weighted to achieve the overall score. You must reach, or an application must reach a satisfactory score on each of the 3 criteria to be considered eligible. But just because an application receives a satisfactory score doesn't necessarily that it will receive an award. The success rate is always based on the number of applications and the size of our budget envelope. So these are the adjudication criteria. You'll see that each has several sub-criteria, and if you would like, you can use this slide later as a reference, or you can see these details on our webpage as well. I'll just go over the sort of broad strokes of the criteria. So first is the quality and the impact of the journal, and this is worth 40% of the overall score. Second is the editorial direction, which is worth 30% of the overall score. And finally, the nature and effectiveness of the journal's current and proposed dissemination strategies, which again is worth 30% of the overall score. Now, note that for each of these sub-criteria, scores are not given for each of them, but they are used to guide the adjudication committee on how to assign their scores. So it is worth taking a look at each of these criteria and using them to guide your application. All right, this is just an overview of the funding cycle. And as Dina was mentioning at the top of the presentation, results will be announced for the current competition in March 2022. Successful awards from the previous competition will end on February 28th, 2022. And then awards that are successful, or applications that are successful, will receive 1 payment per year for their award. I will also let you know that this funding opportunity only occurs every 3 years, and so and which follows along with the tenure of the awards. All right, that brings us to the end of our presentation. We will be having a question and answer session now following, but I will let you know that if you're looking for further information, there is quite a bit in our frequently asked questions section for this particular funding opportunity. In terms of institutional eligibility, we do have guidelines and requirements on our webpage. And if you wish to contact us directly, specifically about more specific questions relating to your journal or to eligibility questions, you can email us at our general inbox for this opportunity. It's scholarlyjournals@SHRC, that's SSHRC-crsh.gc.ca.
Great, thank you so much, Dina and Emma, for the presentation and all of the information you provided. We have a long list of questions that have been popping up consistently through your presentation, so I'll just ask them one by one. I think some of them might have been answered as you proceeded through, but we'll just go over them just to make sure there's good clarity. So for everyone entering questions, please pop them into the Q&A section instead of into the chat. It's just a little bit easier for us to see them with all of the traffic in the chat. So if you've got questions, pop them into the Q&A. All right, so first question from Valerie, and I think you answered this quite clearly after her question was asked, actually, is what if our journal is brand new, first issue coming out in September, we won't have 2 years of data, so will we be eligible?
Yeah, so unfortunately, no, we do want applying journals to have that 2 years of article data. And that's really, that's the basis on which the committee will be able to judge the journal's output, also its budget request as well. So that's kind of really the basis on which the committee judges journals. So yeah.
Great, thank you. Okay, and the email for the inbox to have a journal reviewed, I assume that's that email that's shared on this slide here, is that correct? So scholarly journals.
That's correct. Yeah.
Great. Scholarly journals at sshRC-crsh.gc.ca.
Yes, I was nodding and then I realized not everyone could see that.
Yeah, I only see one head at a time in my Zoom, so we got that one. Okay. A journal, say in physics, with the goal to inspire students to contribute is not eligible then, is it?
Sorry, a journal in physics?
Yes, with the goal to inspire students to contribute.
No, so if it is, yeah, if journals fall outside of the mandate of SHRC, outside of SHRC disciplines, then it would be ineligible, except for those multidisciplinary journals with a primary focus on a SHRC discipline, and then it would be eligible for funding for that proportion of articles that are social sciences and humanities geared. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, does the applicant editor need to submit an appendix to the basic SHRC CV, including the scholarly contributions in the last 5 years?
No, so unlike the Insight Grants opportunity, we're just using the SHRC Web CV for this opportunity. So it's much shorter process to get that completed, and you don't need to add in any contributions.
Great, thanks. Okay, we only have 3 issues in the SHRC identified time period. One was published May 27th, just a few days before the start period. Will this be a problem? Could we include that issue for consideration, or an issue that was just past the cutoff point?
So that that sounds like it would be ineligible unless there are COVID rationales for why there was some sort of delay, and the journal was not able to meet its publication minimums. I would say that we do often get questions about issues that were published either like right before or right after this data period. So in those cases, you would not put that data, you would not count those issues and those articles within the data article section, but you're certainly more than welcome to put those within the journal description and within kind of the journal description section to kind of contextualize the data if need be. And that's always been a feature of that section. It's really meant to give context to the article data section, and it's certainly welcome to be within that. Yeah. Great,
thank you. I feel like this is rapid fire, like question answer session. So let me know if you need to take a pause. Okay, when is the journal considered founded? Is it the first issue, like with the publication of the first issue, or when we formed the editorial board and created the journal or sent out the first call for papers?
That's a good question. I mean, I suppose it depends on when the journal would consider itself to be published, to be founded. The goal there really is that in the application we have that 2 years of data. So again, that's that's really why we have that policy in place, so that the committee has enough data to be able to judge journals and judge journals against each other, right, appropriately as well, because they're looking at a whole cohort of journals.
Great, thank you. All right, do you know if CIHR and I guess NSERC, along those same lines, has a similar grant for scholarly journals?
They don't. I think that NSERC used to have a scholarly publishing journal funding program, but it no longer does. And as far as I'm aware, they're not coming back.
Okay. All right, so you talked quite a bit about the supplemental funding option. Is that funding intended for the journal, or is it intended to be directed to the journal platform?
So it's intended to cover the costs of the journal platform that are paid by the journal. So all of the funding will go towards the journal, and then those costs are meant to pay for any journal platform costs.
Okay. So a journal that doesn't use a journal platform, so for example, a journal that's been built from scratch using a static site generator, those journals would therefore not qualify for the supplement.
Exactly. Unfortunately, unless you're using a Canadian not-for-profit distribution platform, you don't, journal wouldn't qualify for that supplement.
Great. Okay, a question on behalf of an editor. Any specific format requirements? Whoops, the question moved up. Specific format requirements or suggestions for the budget justification and publishing plan beyond the 2-page maximum? So I guess, are there any specific headings, or do you want to see spreadsheets?
Well, I would suggest being clear as an overall goal. I think it really may depend on the specific journal and the specific costs that are being asked for. So it might really be up to the specific journal and the specific situation in terms of how to format it. But again, the goal there is to be clear in justifying the costs for the committee. It might be a good idea to link that section to the journal description, right? So that it's clear to the committee. Sorry, to back up a little bit. When they're looking at the journal budget and the journal justification, they're also going to be going back to the journal description and the article data to see, are these publication numbers that the journal is projecting, does that make sense to the journal, right? How is it going to get to those publication numbers? If you're budgeting more articles, how is that being justified in relation to its past output? So that's also a way to be able to think of that section.
Thanks, Dina. Okay, are you aware of any grant opportunities for journals that are in their development phase or in their first year?
That's a good question. I'm not specifically aware of any opportunities. Maybe this is a good opportunity to also mention for those journals that may be based in Quebec that FRQSC, the Fonds de Recherche de Québec, also offers a scholarly journal funding program for social sciences and humanities journals. Another venue that may be appropriate, and this kind of may depend on very specific context, is the Connections program at SSHRC, which funds various types of research-related activities, conferences, and other types of collaborations and dissemination of research. And we've seen, for example, conferences that then end up in a special issue for a journal, for example. That might be something that might be appropriate for that program.
That's really good to know. Thank you. Okay, and someone saying thank you, Dina and Emma. Do you have any recommendations for the budget justification section? So the journal here, Imaginations, is completely open access and online. We have low production costs, but we like to pay managing editors, copy editors, and designers, and we'd love to bring our accessibility up to standard.
Yeah, so personnel costs are eligible costs for this opportunity. So that is something that could go in the budget justification section. With regards to accessibility, that could be something that is used for that $5,000 towards innovative practices, depending on what is being done to update the journal platform. I don't know if Dina has anything else to add for that.
Oh, that's a great response, Emma.
Great.
Great. Okay, Okay, and a request for you to clarify the distinction between editorial board and publication team, specifically if a journal is using those terms differently from how SSHRC understands those roles.
So the core editorial board is really the main editors of the journal, the associated editors, if you will, who form the core direction for the journal. The production team may be, staff, production staff associated to the journal. There are, and then there is the wider editorial board who also participate in the management of the journal, but maybe not so much in terms of its leadership and direction. So that's kind of the distinction that SSHRC is making there. There are two sections, as Emma had mentioned, for outlining these various components of the editorial team. And again, it might be helpful to think about the way that these sections work in the application, in that when the committee is judging the leadership of the journal, the editorial direction, and the leadership of that core editorial team, they are going to be looking at that section of the application on the core editorial board and the production team. So that's really at the heart of the adjudication for that section. And we are aware that journals do, they have different structures, and that's perfectly appropriate depending on the journal.
Great, thank you. I'm going to jump in. One of our panelists has a question, but she can't enter the question in the Q&A, and neither can I. So I'm just going to ask her question on her behalf. So the question is, what's your recommended way of presenting web usage stats? Do you want to see one joint table, individual tables, graphs? Do you have a preferred sort of way of looking at some of that data?
So again, this really depends on the journal and its situation, and the best way of presenting this in a format that is clear to the committee. I'm sorry that I can't necessarily be very judgmental about what specific format we like, because this really does depend on the journal situation. So yeah, as in a format that is clear, is really the best course of action, and that may be tables for sure. There may be statistics, and also in that section, I should say that if the journal wants to contextualize that data, that's also information that may be very helpful to the committee and is certainly appropriate within that section too.
Great, okay, thank you. There's a question here. I'm not sure if there's enough data there I don't quite understand the question, but I'll ask it. And then if you're unable to answer it, maybe I'll ask the asker to clarify in another question. So the question is, how much is primarily, is that greater than 50%? So I'm not sure what that refers to, if it's primarily.
I think the question asker is asking about the content of the journal and in regards to mandate.
Great.
And they can correct me if I'm wrong, but yes, primarily would be greater than 50% of the content should be, or of the actual articles published should be within SSHRC's mandate.
Okay. And then a question, if we have Indigenous knowledge as part of a science paper, are those outside of the SSHRC mandate?
Nope, they're definitely not outside of the SSHRC mandate. And we do have guidelines on the evaluation of Indigenous knowledge in research as well. So those would certainly be taken into account, and depending on what they're commenting about, if that subject is also within our mandate.
Great. Okay, I'm going to skip over the next question because it was asked again a little further down with some clarification. So I'll move on to a question that I think is asking for some clarity about a very specific clause. So the clause is enter minimum and maximum values to account for variations in the quantity of scholarly articles published during this time period. For multi-authored publications, apply the status of the lead author. Can you maybe clarify what that requirement is?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, for sure. I'm going to dive into the chat because I saw it slide down there. Okay, can you explain this phrase? Enter minimum and maximum values to account for variations in the quantity of scholarly articles published during this time period. For multi-authored publications, apply the status of the lead author. And again, if that question is not entirely clear, we could ask the asker to maybe add a little bit of clarification for what they are looking for.
So I think if I'm understanding correctly, so there's a section, yeah. So within that time period, there may have been some variation, right, in the number of articles that have been published per issue. So that's really what that kind of is referring to. So there might be a minimum or a maximum, or the journal might be publishing a very standard number, in which case the minimum and maximum would be the same.
Okay.
But I think that might answer the question.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, and I do see a brief clarification that's just the same asker is asking, can you explain what does minimum and maximum values mean, I think?
So I hope that I've answered.
Yeah.
If I have not, feel free to contact our inbox.
Thank you. All right, and we have published 4 volumes since 2019, so I thought we were eligible. However, our final volume was published outside of the June 1st, 2019 to May 31st timeline, published instead in August 2021. Does this disqualify us from applying this application cycle?
Yeah, so again, we do ask that for those publication minimums, so that would be 2 issues per year during that time period with 3 articles per issue. Again, if there are COVID-related reasons why those publication minimums are not met, then that may be eligible, but it would need to be described in the section on the description of the journal.
Great, thank you. Okay, and hopefully an easy question for you. Does the online application form allow for 2 or more editors to fill in or input the data?
No, unfortunately, it does not. So we're asking that if there is an editorial collective, that one editor is named as the main applicant, and then that person would complete their SSHRC web CV and the application through the online application portal.
Okay, and maybe a dumb question just from me about the application process. Is there like a PDF template or some kind of place where the team could see all of the questions in advance and fill them in and then give them to one person to add to the portal?
Yeah, so if you go into the application, I believe you should be able to see the application and all of the sections, as well as the instructions. So there's no problem in sharing that information if a team wants to fill it out and then just one person kind of fills it out on our portal. That's not an issue.
Great, thank you. Is there a minimum length requirement for eligible articles?
No, it just needs to conform to our definition of an article. Emma had the exact wording there at some point or another, an original unpublished research results that are peer reviewed.
Great. Okay, for the supplemental funding, I see there's a criteria that the platform must host more than 20 scholarly journals. Is that number hard and fast? Some library publishing programs have fewer than that number.
Yeah, unfortunately, at this point in time, that is the rule, and I can say that the supplement was came into being in 2018, along with some of the changes that happened to the program at that time, when it came to focus funding on open access journals as well, and the decision to fund to aim the supplement at platforms hosting more than 20 journals, scholarly journals, was made so that there's some sort of economy of scale there. So that's really why the rationale for that. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Another question about article length. If a journal has 5 articles per year, but there are some very long, over 100 pages, is there wiggle room about the 6 per year criterion?
Unfortunately not. So again, we don't, it's really difficult because journals are very unique, and they do this in sort of, publish in different fields, and the standards for publication in different fields in terms of length and all of that are very, very different. So we did have to, come up with some sort of publication minimums, and these are the ones that we have, and there is no set length for what qualifies as a scholarly article.
Okay, thank you. All right, just a few questions left. I see 2 more, unless more sort of pop up on the list. If an issue submitted has more than 3 peer-reviewed articles, should they all be included in the application?
Yes, certainly. You should put into the application the minimums and maximums that are published for each of those years, because I was saying before, that'll help you determine the amount of funding that you can apply for, because the funding is in those per article rates that I was discussing before.
Great. Okay, what is the impact of time from submission to acceptance and time from acceptance to publication in the adjudication process? So what is your thinking around some of those timelines, those timeframes?
So that, that's a guideline for the committee in determining the process, the peer review process that the journal uses. That's one of the factors that the committee will take into account. So again, that data is presented in the article data section, can be contextualized certainly in the journal description section. There's also a section for inputting the journal's most commonly used referees. So that's again a section that may help the committee basically understand the peer review process of the journal. And of course, there's a section where applicants are asked to upload the instructions to peer reviewers as well. So the committee is very interested in learning about the peer review process of a journal, its rigor, how long it takes, what authors may expect from the process, from the production quality, and that is a factor in their decision making. Yeah.
Great, thank you. I do see one question in the chat, but I don't think was in the Q&A, so I'll just ask that. So if a journal is a recent member of RUD and receives funding for its publishing costs for current issues, but to populate back files in the platform, they pay out of pocket. I don't know how familiar you are with the funding model for RUD, but for open access journals, sometimes they receive some funds from RUD, but all journals that are members also pay some costs to RUD for publication dissemination. So this person is just asking, they're assuming that those are costs that they can budget for in their request, even though they've got this pay in and receive funds model from RUD. Is that correct?
So I believe
that makes sense.
Yeah,
Okay.
yes,
Yeah,
I
okay.
think so. It sounds eligible. I would also suggest just contacting RUD. They're very, very familiar with our application, and they would definitely be able to give the applicant very specific guidance. And I think they also do some of this budgeting and work with journals on their submissions in terms of impact numbers and things like that. So they'd be able to give more detail there too.
Great. And our costs for minting and registering DOIs, those are considered eligible costs for the journal as well?
Yes, yes, I would believe so, yeah. Okay.
All right, I feel like we've gotten through, that was 25 questions with a few on the side. So thank you so much for patiently working through that lengthy list. Many thanks to our presenters. Thank you, Dina, and thank you, Emma. And thank you to Julie for running all of this in the background. A few questions came up about whether the session would be recorded and whether the slides would be available. And the answer to both of those questions is yes. The recording will be made available on the Carl YouTube channel. And then I'm hoping that we can distribute the slides out to all the places where we distributed the call for registration. So hopefully you will see a link to that come through your email in the next couple of days. So thank you all. Thank you, attendees, and thank you again to our presenters. This was so helpful.
Thank you very much. Thank you to Sonya as well for leading us.
Yes.
And guiding the question period as well, very ably.
And I will just add, before we go, if anybody, maybe isn't eligible to apply this time around, but would like to participate as a committee member, we are still actively recruiting committee members. And so if you're interested, you can also email us at our same inbox.
Great. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.